was destroyed. So it was particularly a violent period, and that's why some of these comparisons are being made. Douglas Brinkley is a professor of history at Rice University. He's also a presidential historian, and it's nice to have you back on the program, Douglas, when so many comparisons are being made. How legitimate are these comparisons?
Well, they're very useful because it reminds us that we've had problems in the Middle East since World War II. No embassy in the Arab world is safe. Just a few months back when the Arab Spring happened, we're all wondering, is this a good thing? Is this pro-democracy? Should we all be celebrating? And we've been hesitant. The fear now is that an Arab winter is coming, that you're going to see an increase in Islamic terrorism throughout the region, simply to kind of stick the finger in the eye of Yankee imperialism.
Is that what happened, Douglas, after the period in 1979? Did we see a move towards a more Islamist ideology in the Middle East?
Well, it saw a move towards crippling an American administration. Jimmy Carter, as president, didn't know what to do. The media was going night after night, days held hostage, Americans in hostage. There's a feeling we couldn't control our own embassy or liberate people held hostage, and it was a way of weakening American power and prestige. Eventually, Ronald Reagan came in, and a deal was negotiated. Those hostages were released. But it gave, for a generation, it showed that you can fight a giant like the United States using terrorism. And it really wasn't until 9/11 actually happened. Of course, the World Trade Center had been bombed in the early 90s. We had, problems in the Clinton years in Kenya and Tanzania on the coal. But it wasn't until 9/11 that we in America were fighting a war on terror. And sometimes we get lazy about it. We forget we are living in an age of a war on terror. And just like the Cold War went on for decade after decade, this war on terror did not end simply because Osama bin Laden was killed.
Sometimes we search for patterns when things happen that we can't explain. I'm sure you're well familiar with this as a historian, and the comparisons to 1979 just did not bloom overnight with what happened in the Middle East. We've seen those comparisons to the presidential election as well. The course of recent events, does that enrich that comparison? Do you see patterns, if you will?
Well, there are patterns like this. I mean, Colin Powell famously said about intervention, if you break it, you own it. So when we went into Iraq and we broke it and we killed Saddam Hussein, we essentially owned Iraq. But building a civil society and a democracy in that part of the world's tough business. NATO and the United States did a magnificent job in Libya, and we got the bad guy. Gaddafi's gone, but it leaves a void. If we're there in Libya now, we're surrounded by the old Gaddafi forces and a kind of Islamic terrorist organizations that can trigger street protest at any moment. We think that the Facebook revolution in Cairo for the Arab Spring was a great thing. Well, now we're getting YouTube used against us on a video nobody watched, but certainly now with all this talk about it, people are looking at this bad hate film. So these are complicated times, and the key is that the United States has to realize we're still fighting a war on terror, and our vigilance has to be every day, and our embassies need quadruple protected, and our Marines have to go in to Libya and places, and Yemen, and protect our embassies. We cannot count on the host countries protecting American property. We have to do it ourselves.
Douglas, we're seeing some live pictures of Cairo on the screen, and one of the things that has come up when we see these protests and throughout the Arab Spring, and you mentioned it as well, is that this is democracy in motion. These protests are part of the growth in the Middle East, and some have compared it to our own history and our own violence on our road to democracy as a template, if you will, as a point of comparison. Again, does that comparison work here?
Well, yes, and I think one of the big things viewers have to do, we don't want to start disliking Libyans. There are many Libyan freedom fighters. Hundreds of thousands of people in Libya are putting their lives on the line for democracy. There are many Libyans mourning the death of our ambassador. There are people apparently who tried to save him on his way to the hospital. It's not as if all of Libya is celebrating this as a victory. Nevertheless, the fact that this was coordinated on the 11th anniversary of 9/11, and the recognition, as your previous guest accurately said, we have soft targets. We may be able to create a Fortress America, and we're doing well with our airport security, and we've the FBI's busted some people. We're scattered all over the world, and we're very vulnerable. I mean, it gets buried in the news, but we're losing soldiers in Afghanistan by rogue terror attacks, and it's very hard for the United States and for embassies to protect themselves against suicide bombers. This is something Israel struggles with every day, and we're probably going to have to create an even new counter-terror initiative after this debacle in Libya.
Some things we're going to watch, and a good reminder about Afghanistan as well, Douglas, as we take such a close look at what's happening in one part of the world. Thank you for the time today. Always appreciate your expertise.
Thank you.
It seems like there's almost always trouble in the Middle East, but the trouble